A mother sells her dead husband's cabin to pay off her new lover's debts. She calls her daughter a military officer, deployed overseas, and laughs about it. But what she didn't know, that cabin was never hers to sell. And by the time she realized the truth, she had already lost everything. This story was sent to us by a viewer named Alison, and when our team read it, we knew we had to share it with you. Alison Brooks was a military intelligence officer stationed thousands of miles from home, serving her country in one of the most dangerous regions in the world. She had already sacrificed so much: her time, her safety, her chance to be there when her father took his last breath. And while she was protecting her nation, her own mother was plotting to erase every trace of the man who raised her. 11 months after her father passed away, Alison received a phone call. It was her mother, Linda. But this wasn't a call to check in. It wasn't a call to say she missed her daughter. No, Linda called to brag. She told Alison she had sold the cabin, the one her father built with his own 2 hands. The one filled with every memory Alison had of the man who truly loved her. And Linda didn't sell it to pay bills or cover medical expenses. She sold it to pay off the debts of Richard, her new husband, a man she married just 6 months after burying Alison's father. And then Linda laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You weren't even here. What could you have done?" But here's what Linda didn't expect. Alison didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply asked one question: who signed the papers? And when Linda answered, Alison said 5 words that should have terrified her. "Thanks for letting me know." Then she hung up. Linda thought she had won. She thought her daughter was too far away, too powerless, too weak to do anything about it. She had no idea that Alison's father had seen this coming. He knew exactly who his wife really was. He knew about Richard before anyone else did. And before he died, he made sure that if Linda ever crossed a certain line, the consequences would be devastating. What happens next is a story of patience, preparation, and the kind of justice that doesn't come from anger. It comes from truth. A con man, exposed in front of everyone. A mother abandoned by the very man she chose over her family. A best friend who finally turned her back. And a letter from the grave that revealed what Alison's father really thought of the woman he married. But the most satisfying moment, that satisfying came when Linda Satisfying asked her daughter, "Why didn't you stop me?" And Alison's answer, satisfying, broke her satisfying completely. Now let's hear this story, the way Alison told it to us in her own words from the very beginning. My name is Alison Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years serving as a military intelligence officer in the United States Army. My job is to analyze threats, process information under pressure, and make decisions that keep people alive. I've been trained to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart, but nothing in my training prepared me for the phone call I received from my own mother. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was nearing the end of my 15-month deployment at a base in the Middle East. The days there blurred together: long hours, insecure rooms, endless reports, the constant hum of machinery, and tension. But that particular day, I had a rare break. A few hours where I wasn't needed, where I could sit in my quarters and just breathe. The base was quiet in that heavy way military installations get when everyone's either working or sleeping. I was sitting on my bunk, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Most of them were of my father, Thomas Brooks, a man who built things with his hands and spoke more through his actions than his words. He had passed away almost a year ago, and not a single day went by when I didn't think about him. My mother, on the other hand, had become a stranger. Since my father's funeral, our conversations had been short and transactional. She'd call when she needed something: money, advice on paperwork, someone to complain to. I'd listen, say as little as possible, and hang up feeling hollow. So when I saw her name flash across my screen that afternoon, I didn't feel surprise. I felt something closer to confirmation, like I'd been waiting for this moment without knowing exactly what it would look like. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Alison." Her voice was bright. Too bright. There was an energy in it that I hadn't heard in years, like she just won something and couldn't wait to tell everyone. I have wonderful news. I finally did it. I sold the cabin. For a moment, I didn't respond. I just let the words settle, making sure I understood them correctly. The cabin. My father's cabin. The one he built with his own hands after coming home from Vietnam. The one where he taught me to fish, to build, to see the world clearly. The only place that still felt like him. You sold it? I said, keeping my voice flat. Yes. $180,000? Can you believe it? That lakefront property was worth more than I thought. She laughed, and the sound of it made my stomach turn. Richard and I are finally going to be debt-free. His business had a few setbacks, but this takes care of everything. We're starting fresh. Richard, her new husband, the man she married just 6 months after my father was buried. I had never trusted him, but my mother didn't want to hear it. She never wanted to hear anything that contradicted what she'd already decided to believe. The money's already been transferred, she continued, as if she were telling me about a successful shopping trip. Richard handled everything. He knows people in real estate, you know, made the whole process so easy. I stayed silent. She kept talking. Your father would have wanted me to be happy, Alison. He wouldn't have wanted me sitting in that old cabin, rotting away with a bunch of memories. Richard helped me see that holding on to the past was holding me back. You should try it sometime. You're too sentimental, just like your father. There it was, the cruelty wrapped in casual indifference. She wasn't just telling me she'd sold the cabin. She was telling me that everything my father built, everything he loved, everything he tried to leave behind, meant nothing to her. Less than nothing. It was an obstacle, a burden she'd finally thrown off. You weren't even here, she added, her voice turning slightly defensive, as if she could sense my silence wasn't agreement. What could you have done anyway? You're always gone. Always somewhere else. At least Richard is here. At least he understands what I need. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I did what I was trained to do. I listened. I processed. And I waited for the moment that mattered. Who signed the papers? Mom. She paused, caught off guard by the question. What? The sale. Who signed the documents? I did, of course. She sounded almost offended, like I was questioning her competence. It's in my name. Has been for years. Why are you asking? I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I wasn't in the Middle East anymore. I was back in Ohio, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and grief. My father was lying in the bed, thin and tired, but his eyes were still sharp. He had reached out and taken my hand. Your mother will make a choice someday, he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. The wrong one. When that happens, you'll know what to do. I've made sure of it. I had asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. And Allie, he added, squeezing my hand, don't blame yourself for not stopping her. Some people can only learn by losing. I didn't understand those words then, but sitting on my bunk thousands of miles from home, with my mother's laughter still ringing in my ears, I finally did. Thanks for letting me know, I said. And then I hung up. She didn't call back. She probably thought I was sulking. Or maybe she didn't care either way. She had what she wanted. The money was gone. The cabin was gone. And in her mind, that was the end of the story. But when the call ended, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt certain. My father had warned me this day would come. He just didn't tell me he'd already written the ending. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my quarters for a long time. The bass hummed with its usual distant noises. Generators, vehicles, the occasional voice echoing down concrete hallways, but none of it reached me. I was somewhere else entirely. I was back at the cabin, standing on the dock with my father watching the sun set over the lake, while he taught me how to tie a fishing knot. My father, Thomas Brooks, was not a man who filled rooms with his voice. He was the opposite. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he commented, and when he did say something, it carried weight. He came back from Vietnam in 1972, 22 years old, and carrying things inside him that he never fully shared with anyone. The war had changed him in ways my mother never understood and never tried to. But instead of letting that darkness consume him, he found a way to build something from it. He became a carpenter, worked with his hands for over 30 years, crafting furniture, restoring old homes, and eventually building the cabin that would become the most important place in my life. He chose the land himself, a quiet stretch of lakefront property in rural Ohio, far from highways and neighbors and noise. He cleared the trees, laid the foundation, and constructed every wall, every beam, every window frame with his own 2 hands. It took him 3 years. He never rushed it. He said the cabin wasn't just a structure, it was his way of proving to himself that he could still create something good after everything he'd seen. That cabin was where I learned who my father really was. He taught me to fish on that dock patient and calm, even when I tangled the line for the 100th time. He taught me to work with wood in the small workshop he'd built beside the main house, showing me how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand with the grain, how to respect the material. But more than any practical skill, he taught me how to see people clearly. I remember one evening sitting on the porch while the fireflies blinked across the water when he said something I never forgot. "Ali, you can tell everything about a person by what they do when they think no one's watching, and by what they're willing to sell." At the time, I thought he was talking about business, about deals gone wrong. Now, I understood he was talking about my mother. The cabin was worth $180,000 on paper, mostly because of the land, the lake access, the potential for development. But to me, it was priceless. It was the only place I ever felt unconditionally loved, and my mother had sold it to pay off her new husband's debts without a second thought. My mother, Linda, had always been restless. Even when I was a child, I sensed that she felt trapped by the life she'd chosen. She married my father when she was young, and as the years passed, I think she convinced herself that she had settled for less than she deserved. My father's quietness, which I found comforting, she found suffocating. His simplicity, which I saw as integrity, she saw as a lack of ambition. She wanted more excitement, more admiration, more proof that she was special. When my father got sick, something shifted in her. I noticed it during my brief visits home, how she seemed impatient with his decline, how she talked about after, as if she were waiting for a new chapter to begin. And when he finally passed, she didn't wait long to start writing it. She met Richard at church of all places, a widow's support group. He was charming, well-dressed, and full of stories about his career as a real estate investor. He spoke about properties in Arizona, developments in Florida, deals that were just about to close. He made my mother feel seen in ways she claimed my father never had. Within 3 months, he had moved into her house. Within 4, he had proposed. They were married 6 months after my father's funeral, a timeline that scandalized half the town and delighted my mother, who took their judgment as jealousy. I only met Richard once briefly during a video call. He smiled too much, complimented me too eagerly. And when he thought the camera wasn't on him, his expression went flat and calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. But when I tried to voice my concerns to my mother, she shut me down immediately. "You're just like your father," she said, "suspicious of anyone who actually makes me happy." I didn't push further. There was no point. She had already made her choice, but my father had seen it all coming. The day after my mother's phone call, I contacted Harold Webb, my father's lawyer, and one of his oldest friends from their army days. Harold had handled the estate, and I knew if anyone understood what my father had been thinking in his final months, it was him. When I reached him through a secure line from the base, his voice was heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "I wondered when you'd call," he said. I assume Linda told you about the cabin. She did. Harold was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. Alison, there are things you need to know. Things your father asked me to share with you only if certain events occurred. He told me that 3 months before my father died, while he was still strong enough to think clearly, he had hired a private investigator to look into Richard. The results were damning. Richard's real name was Richard Mallory. He had a history of targeting widows and divorcees, 3 confirmed cases in Arizona and Florida, all following the same pattern: charm them, isolate them, drain their assets, and disappear before anyone could press charges. My father had compiled everything: court records, victim statements, photographs of Richard with other women. And 2 weeks before he passed, he sent it all to my mother in an email. Your father was thorough, Harold said quietly. He set up the email with a read receipt. The confirmation came back 23 minutes after he sent it. She read every word, Alison. Then she deleted it and never mentioned it to him. He died knowing she chose to ignore the truth. The silence that followed those words was absolute. My mother wasn't a victim who had been deceived. She was someone who had looked at the truth, decided it was inconvenient, and erased it so she could keep living the lie she preferred. Your father didn't just leave an inheritance, Alison, Harold continued. He left a test, and your mother failed it before he was even gone. Harold let those words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. I could hear him shifting papers on the other end of the line, the familiar rustle of legal documents being organized. When he spoke again, his tone shifted from personal to professional, though the weight of what he was about to explain never left his voice. Alison, your father didn't just suspect your mother might do something like this. He planned for it. And he made sure that if she ever crossed a certain line, the consequences would be automatic. He explained it to me in terms anyone could understand, which I appreciated. Legal language has a way of obscuring simple truths, but Harold cut through all of that. My father had created something called a revocable living trust several months before he died. The cabin, along with several other assets, was placed inside this trust. What this meant, Harold said, was that the cabin didn't belong to my mother. It didn't belong to me either, at least not directly. It belonged to the trust itself. Your mother was given what's called a life estate, Harold continued. That means she had the legal right to use the cabin for the rest of her life. She could live there, maintain it, visit it whenever she wanted. But she did not have the right to sell it, transfer it, or give it away. That authority was never hers. I asked him why my mother seemed so confident that the cabin was in her name. Harold sighed. Because she never read the documents, Alison. Your father tried to explain it to her after he set everything up, but she wasn't interested. She assumed that as his wife, everything would simply pass to her. She never bothered to understand the difference between using something and owning it. The trust also contained what Harold called a trigger clause. If my mother ever attempted to sell any asset held within the trust, 2 things would happen automatically. First, the transaction would be void, legally meaningless, as if it never occurred. Second, all remaining assets in the trust, including my father's life insurance payout and his retirement accounts, would transfer immediately and entirely to me. My mother would lose access to everything. Think of it like borrowing a car, Harold said, using an analogy my father apparently suggested himself. You can drive it your whole life if the owner lets you, but you can't sell it because it's never yours. Your mother drove that cabin for years. The moment she tried to sell it, she proved she never respected whose it really was. There was another layer to this that Harold revealed carefully. The sale on paper had appeared to go through. My mother had signed documents, money had changed hands, and the elderly couple who purchased the cabin believed they now owned it. But the reason it had gotten that far was not because the sale was legitimate. It was because Richard had help. Richard has an accomplice, Harold said. A title company officer he's worked with before in other states. This person helped falsify the ownership verification process, making it look like your mother had clear title to sell. It's part of a larger pattern. The police are now investigating both of them as part of a multi-state fraud operation. I absorbed all of this in silence. My father had seen everything. He had known exactly what kind of man Richard was, and he had known exactly what my mother was capable of when given the opportunity to choose selfishness over integrity. But he hadn't set out to trap her. He had set out to give her every possible chance to do the right thing. Harold read me something my father had written, words he asked to be shared with me, only if this situation ever arose. "I don't want to punish Linda," my father had said. "I want to give her every chance. If she respects what I built, everything stays fine. She can live comfortably for the rest of her life, and Alison will inherit what's left when the time comes. But if she chooses betrayal after everything I showed her about Richard, then she faces the consequences of her own choice, not mine." That was who my father was. Even at the end, even knowing what my mother had done, with his warning, he still gave her a way out. He still left the door open for her to be decent. The system he created wasn't designed to punish. It was designed to protect me, to protect his legacy, and in a strange way, to protect my mother from herself. If she had simply honored the cab and respected what it represented, none of this would have happened. She could have lived her life with Richard spent the insurance money however she wanted and never faced a single consequence. But she didn't. She chose to sell the one thing my father asked her to preserve. And she did it knowing full well who Richard really was. After Harold finished explaining everything, I sat alone with my thoughts for a long time. I had a choice to make. I could pick up the phone, call my mother and warn her. I could tell her the sale was void, that she was about to lose everything, and give her one final chance to fix it before the consequences became irreversible. But then I remembered. I remembered that she had read my father's email, every word of it, and deleted it without ever mentioning it to him. I remembered that she didn't come to my military graduation because she had plans with Richard that weekend. I remembered that after my father's funeral, she never once asked if there was anything of his I wanted to keep. She had packed up his belongings and donated most of them within a month, keeping only what she could sell. My father gave her every chance. He warned her directly. He showed her the truth about the man she chose, and she deleted it because the lie was more comfortable than reality. What more was I supposed to do? I made my decision. I would say nothing. Not because I wanted revenge. I didn't. But because I had finally accepted something I had been avoiding for years. My mother had 33 years to love me properly, and she chose not to. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was simply the final confirmation of who she had always been. I contacted my commanding officer and began the process of requesting R&R leave. It was time to go home. Not to save my mother, not to stop what was coming, but to be there when the truth finally caught up with her. The cabin was never meant to be kept. It was meant to reveal who was worth keeping, and the test had already been graded. 3 weeks later, I was standing on American soil again. The R&R leave had come through faster than I expected, and within days of landing, I found myself driving through the familiar streets of my hometown. Everything looked the same. The quiet neighborhoods, the church steeples, the old storefronts, but I felt like a stranger returning to a place that no longer belonged to me. My mother had called the day after I arrived, her voice lighter than it had any right to be. She invited me to the house for what she called a mature conversation. She said she wanted us to move forward as a family, to put the unpleasantness behind us. I agreed without argument. She took my compliance as surrender. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed 2 cars parked out front. One was Richard's sleek sedan. The other belonged to Diane, my mother's best friend of 30 years. I understood immediately what this was. My mother hadn't invited me for reconciliation. She had invited me for a performance. She wanted witnesses to watch her difficult daughter finally fall in line. The house had changed since my last visit. New furniture filled the living room. Expensive pieces that looked out of place against the dated wallpaper. Decorations I didn't recognize sat on shelves that used to hold my father's books. Everything had been purchased with money from the cabin sale. My father's legacy converted into status symbols for a woman who never appreciated what she had. Richard greeted me at the door with a smile so rehearsed it made my skin crawl. He played the role of supportive stepfather, perfectly offering me coffee and asking about my deployment with practiced concern. I declined both and walked past him into the living room where my mother sat beside Diane on the new sofa. "Alison," my mother said, her tone dripping with condescension, "I'm so glad you're being mature about this. Your father would have wanted us to move forward, not dwell on the past." I said nothing. I simply sat down across from her and placed a leather briefcase on the coffee table between us. She glanced at it, but didn't ask what was inside. She was too focused on delivering her prepared speech about healing and family and letting go of material attachments. I let her talk. I had coordinated everything with Harold beforehand. Today was the day the truth would surface, and I didn't need to say a word to make it happen. The doorbell rang. Richard moved to answer it, still wearing his mask of charm. But when he opened the door, his expression flickered. Standing on the porch was Harold Webb, dressed in a dark suit and carrying a folder thick with documents. Beside him stood an elderly couple I had never met, a woman with red-rimmed eyes clutching her husband's arm, both of them looking like they hadn't slept in days. Behind them, a local police officer waited with his hands folded in front of him. "What is this?" my mother demanded, rising from the sofa. The elderly woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We put everything we had into that cabin. $180,000, our entire retirement savings. We were going to spend our final years there watching the lake, finally, at peace." Her voice cracked. "And now they tell us the sale was never legal." Harold stepped inside his presence, commanding the room. "Mrs. Brooks, you signed documents for a property you never legally owned. The cabin was held in a trust established by your late husband. You had the right to use it, not sell it. The title company that processed this transaction was part of a fraud operation that Richard has utilized in multiple states." My mother's face went pale. She turned to Richard, searching for reassurance, for an explanation for the charm that had carried her through every difficult moment since they met. But Richard's mask had already shattered. When the police officer mentioned ongoing investigations in Arizona and Florida, something in Richard snapped. The smooth, attentive husband vanished, replaced by something cold and cornered. He turned on my mother with a viciousness that shocked everyone in the room. "I didn't force her to do anything," he spat. "She came to me with the idea to sell that cabin. She said she hated it. Hated everything her dead husband left behind. She couldn't wait to be rid of it." "Richard," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think I actually loved you? You were a mark, Linda. An easy one. Lonely, bitter, desperate to feel young again. You practically handed me everything on a silver platter." The room was silent. My mother stood frozen, her world unraveling in real time. Richard wasn't finished. "And you want to know the funny part? Your husband tried to warn you. I saw the email on your computer before you deleted it. Court records, victim statements, everything. You read it. You knew exactly who I was." He sneered. "You chose this." Diane rose slowly from the sofa. For 30 years, she had been my mother's closest friend, her confidant, her unwavering supporter. But as she looked at Linda now, there was no sympathy in her eyes, only the release of something long suppressed. "I tried to warn you about him," Diane said quietly. 3 times. You told me I was jealous. You said the same thing to Thomas when he tried to protect you." She shook her head. "You've spent years telling everyone how difficult Alison is, how she abandoned you, how she never appreciated everything you sacrificed. But look who's standing here with the truth, Linda, and look who's been lying to everyone, including yourself." My mother turned to me, desperation cracking through her composure. You knew about all of this, and you didn't warn me." I stood slowly and looked directly into her eyes. "Dad warned you. He sent you proof. You deleted it. Diane warned you. You ignored her. What exactly was I supposed to do that they hadn't already tried?" She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "You weren't tricked, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "You chose. Again and again and again, and you finally ran out of people to blame. The police officer stepped forward and placed a hand on Richard's arm. He didn't resist as they led him toward the door. Margaret sobbed quietly into her husband's shoulder. Diane gathered her purse and left without another word. And my mother just stood there, surrounded by her new furniture and her empty house, watching everything she had built on lies collapse around her. The room didn't explode. It just fell apart, like a house built on sand, finally meeting its own weight. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived one by one, steady and unavoidable. Richard was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud spanning 3 states. As news of his scheme spread, other victims came forward, women, just like my mother, widows and divorcees, who had trusted his charm and paid dearly for it. His lawyers tried to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was looking at years in federal prison, and all the smooth words in the world couldn't save him now. My mother was not charged with any crime. Legally, she was considered a victim of Richard's fraud, even though she had been a willing participant in selling something that was never hers. But the trust my father created did exactly what it was designed to do. The moment she attempted to sell the cabin, every remaining asset transferred to me, his life insurance, his retirement accounts, everything he had spent a lifetime building. She was left with almost nothing. She had to sell the house within 2 months. The new furniture, the decorations, all the things she had purchased, with cabin money gone. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, a place with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. Her friends, the ones she had impressed with stories of her new life with Richard, quietly distanced themselves when the full truth emerged. Diane never spoke to her again. My mother called me repeatedly in those weeks. Sometimes she apologized, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine remorse. Other times she blamed me, accused me of conspiring against her, demanded to know why I hadn't stopped her when I had the chance. And sometimes she just cried, saying nothing at all. I never answered. There was nothing left to say. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years complaining about feeling trapped with my father, suffocated by his simplicity, desperate for something more. Now she was truly alone, and it was entirely her own doing. Before everything was finalized, Harold delivered one last item. A sealed envelope yellowed with age addressed to my mother in my father's handwriting. He had kept it locked away for almost a year waiting. Thomas asked me to give her this only if things came to this point, Harold said quietly. He hoped I would never have to. I wasn't there when my mother opened it, but Harold told me later what it contained. My father's final words to the woman he had married, written in the careful script of a man who knew he was running out of time. Linda, if you're reading this, it means you made the choice. I prayed you wouldn't. I knew about Richard. I tried to warn you. You didn't listen. You never did, when it came to seeing what was right in front of you. I'm not writing this to punish you. I'm writing because even now, after everything, I need you to know I loved you. Not the woman you wanted to be, but the woman you were when we first met before bitterness made you forget how to be kind. Our daughter is stronger than both of us. She got that from having to survive you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect her from that. I hope one day you find peace, but I know you won't find it by taking from others. Thomas. When Harold read those words to me, I had to step outside. My father had loved her until the very end, and his greatest regret wasn't losing the cabin or the money. It was that he couldn't shield me from my own mother. A few days later, I met privately with Margaret and Don Peterson, the elderly couple who had lost their retirement savings in the fraudulent sale. They looked exhausted, hollowed out by weeks of uncertainty and grief. I told them the truth, that my father built that cabin with his own hands, and he would have hated knowing it caused pain to innocent people. I made them an offer. The cabin would remain in the trust, legally mine, but they could live there for a symbolic rent for the rest of their lives. The only condition was that they preserve it exactly as my father left it. Margaret broke down crying. Why would you do this for us? Because my father believed in giving people the chances they deserve, I said. You deserve one. My mother had hers. We restored the hand-carved sign my father made decades ago and mounted it on the front door. The Thomas Brooks cabin. His name, his legacy finally honored the way it should have been. I wrote my mother one last letter before I returned to duty. I don't hate you. I don't even want you to suffer. But Dad taught me something you never understood. Love without boundaries. Isn't love, it's surrender. I hope you find peace, but you won't find it with me. On my final morning in Ohio, I stood before the cabin at sunrise, holding an old photograph of my father and me. I was 10 years old, in that picture, smiling beside the man who taught me everything that mattered. He didn't leave me property. He left me permission to see the truth, to accept it, and to walk away from people who only know how to take. My mother thought she sold my father's cabin. What she really sold was her place in my life. And that concludes Alison's story. A daughter who refused to let betrayal turn her bitter. A father whose love reached beyond the grave to protect what mattered most. And a mother who learned too late that the people we take for granted are often the ones we can never get back. If this story moved you, I hope you carry one truth with you. Boundaries are not walls built from anger. They are bridges built from self-respect. Loving someone does not mean accepting their cruelty. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who only know how to take. Thank you for staying until the end. If Alison's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved? We would love to hear your story.